afternoon. I hope you can hear me all well here. My name is Peter van der Putten and welcome to our online talk show from SAILS. I'm just waving to my colleague here in the back just to see whether we are audible on the live stream, Roy. So we're ready to go and we're ready to rumble. Welcome to the SAILS live stream talk show on artificial intelligence, the future of AI as human. My name is Peter van der Putten. I'm an assistant professor here at Leiden University, and it's a pleasure to have you here. And let me tell you a little bit about SAILS, what it is. So it's a university-wide research program, and it's university-wide for a specific reason, because we think that AI has actually reached puberty. It has passed infancy, reached puberty. It's ready to grow up, but it's still a little bit of a teenager. But it means to move out of the confines of computer science and into the various disciplines like archaeology, humanities, science, you name it, to study it really from a multidisciplinary point of view. We also believe in academic freedom, our university motto is Praesidium Libertatis, which means bastion of freedom, right? So we really want to study AI with an open mind. That means that you also need to be open not just to the benefits, but also to the potential risk and downsides, because AI truly is exponential technology, which is transformative. So we really need to keep an eye open for that. And also it means that we need to bridge the gap between the academic world and society. So we don't want to be stuck in our ivory tower here doing research. We really want to make sure that we engage with society and make sure that the future of AI will be and should be human. Okay, so given what I said, we're going to cover a very kaleidoscopic range of topics here. We want to investigate, what is our relationship with the AI, our entanglement. Is it going to be symbiotic? Is it going to be antagonistic, or more a way of working together? And also, what can we ultimately learn from the AI? What makes us human, perhaps even beyond intelligence. And finally, what are some of the grand challenges that we have out there? We're all a little bit into an AI summer at the moment. But what would be the research agenda for the next AI summer? So, and we've not just invited researchers, given all of this, we also invited some artists and designers, because they're always really good in like scientists they're also interested in asking questions. So what are the right questions to ask here? We're going to talk to Petra Gemeinbuch and Rob Saunders about their cybernetic robot art. We're going to talk about Eduard Fosch about inclusive robotics, how we can make AI and robotics more open to different groups. We're going to talk to Jasper Schelling and Suzanne Verberne to reflect on some of the more evil side effects, polarization in online media. How can we maybe reverse the role of AI here and actually use it for good purposes? And we'll close it off with a very special guest, Jay McClelland from Stanford University. His books on connectionist models of the mind, they kind of fueled the previous AI summer. So we thought it might be in the 80s, right? So we thought it might be really interesting to talk to him. But let's move to the first guest. First, we're going to talk to Vera van der Sijp. So Vera, are you there? Hey Vera, can you hear me now?
Yes, can you hear me?
It's I can hear you wonderfully. It's the irony of technology, but actually it was a great intro because what we were playing on the live stream full screen is actually some of the visuals that you designed for this event. So you're a creative coder, you're an artist, you exhibited in the Kunsthal, for example, in Rotterdam. But you also helped us out with these wonderful visuals. And actually, word has it that you used AI to design these visuals. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I used Style Gun, which is an abbreviation of Style Generative Adversarial Network. The original script is from NVIDIA researchers, Tero Karas, amongst others. And I actually used this script in a part of my master's thesis at Media Technology in Leiden. And in this case, I actually trained it again on the entire alphabet, just lowercase, to see basically which letters are connected or closer to each other in the Latin space.
Oh, visually, you mean, so it's almost like a mind map, a visual mind map of how these, what the similarities are between these letters.
Yeah, you can kind of combine or compare it to a point cloud, which is like this 3D cloud with things that are closer to each other are more similar, but then in the Latin space, it's 512 dimensions instead of 3. So it's a little bit more complex than that, but it boils down pretty much to that. So basically what I did, I actually was doing some research on this myself already. Yeah. And I tried to map the different letters in this script that I trained basically to be able to navigate from one to the other. And this was a perfect moment to test it out.
Cool.
Yes.
So we're kind of walking over the neocortex of my little robot friend here. He has learned the space of letters, and we're climbing from, we're moving from one letter to the other. That's really nice. We can look into the robot brain away here. Maybe a final question for you is, in the context of AI and creativity, then some people are maybe, sometimes there's this discourse around that people are afraid that art will lose its aura if we use AI, or that there are all these big philosophical questions about who owns the work. But you seem to be more pragmatic, more practical. You just use it as a tool. So what is your view on that? Is that something that concerns you, or not at all? Actually, are you more kind of using it as a tool, as you wish?
I am using it more as a tool. I am concerned as well for using AI for larger projects. I think within graphic design, I'm not necessarily concerned because, as you said, it can be used as a tool, and that actually it can be a matter of co-creation or artificial creativity. So I'm not really concerned about that field, and that's also why I'm actually really enjoying just being very pragmatic and very experimental, just trying to experiment with these techniques instead of of course there's always an ethical side to it. So I'm also very aware of if you're making work and you're using a tool, if someone else wrote that, they have also some influence on your work. But I think this is very often the case with any tool. So
yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, Vera, thanks a lot. Sorry that we had to keep this a little bit short, but it was really interesting.
No worries.
And we hope to collaborate with you in future as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, all me too. Thank you.
Bye. So that brings us to the next guests. Actually, we're here in this virtual laboratory. Of course, we're in the COVID days. So the only safe place would be to be in would be a robot lab. So we're here in the so-called asocial creature lab in Leiden University to be safe from the virus. Our next guests, this gives me a nice bridge to the next guests, and that's Petra Gamijnboek and Rob Sanders. So Petra and Rob, are you here? right. Well, sorry for the delay. I hope you guys are still there.
Yes, we're still here.
Good. Yeah. So, like I said, you're actually researching our entanglement with technology. That's what I read on Petra's website, where a lot of your joint work is featured. That sounded like really interesting. Petra, let's maybe start with you. You probably didn't wake up one day and said like, let's investigate our entanglement with technology by making arts with robots. So can you say a couple of things about your inspiration? Like how did you actually get into that area of topic?
Okay. Hi, Peter. First of all, thanks for inviting us. And I often describe myself as an artistic researcher, really trying to spending all my academic career melding the artistic and research. And as part of artistic research, aesthetics really plays a central role. But I don't understand aesthetics as a question of beauty or even confined to the visual sense. I understand aesthetics as a means of embodied meaning making, actually. And so all my practice was involved in that. And before I worked with robots, I worked a lot with virtual reality technologies. In particular, I did my graduate studies in the lab in Chicago where they invented the cave, which was inspired by the Enterprise's holodeck. It's just that you couldn't touch anything there really, but you were embedded or immersed in a virtual space. And I was always interested in actually the non-human agencies of these human, non-human ecologies that we are creating with technology. And in virtual reality, while we are, or at least in a cave where we are embodied, where we interact with these virtual entities in embodied ways, they were still always virtual and reliant on, suspending our disbelief, as they talked about it in virtual reality. So I was really interested in working with non-human agencies in a shared physical space where we can actually share the space with them and bodily empathize and interact with them. And this is where robots for me are the perfect candidates. They are, for me, non-human creatures, human-made, but non-human social entities. And our practice is really focusing on exploring possible relationships we can have with these non-human social creatures.
Yeah, well, that sounds very interesting, and indeed, so you're approaching it from a social point of view. It's not about the bot; it's about us and the bot, and how do we reflect on the bot. Maybe a good way to make this a little bit tangible is to look at a couple of your joint work. We'll start actually with a work that's called Accomplice. And the first time I saw it, I thought like, hey, this is a very interesting work. That's actually how I got to know you. So and I'll explain just a little bit about the work, and then we're going to roll a quick video. So, but let's imagine, dear audience, that you walk into a museum room, your typical pristine, modernistic, empty museum room, and you walk in there. And then you go like, hey, there's nothing here. Where's the artwork? But turns out you're not alone, because there's a colony of little creatures living in between the walls, and they're trying to interface with you, but they can't because the wall is in between. So let's roll a quick video here of the work. All right. So I hope that gave you the audience. I'm chatting here with Peter and Rob. They're just seeing me, so they're not watching the live stream. But I hope that gave you a little bit of an impression of the work. It's really interesting. So, Peter, maybe first you can tell us a little bit more about the concept of this work. I mean, personally, for me, I really had this strong kind of impression of curiosity, you know, not just a bunch of evil bots hiding, but maybe there were also friendly bots, but they just a personal impression, and there's probably a range of things that inspired you to make this. So maybe you can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I mean, curiosity was certainly a big component of the work, but I asked Rob to talk about that later because that's his area of speciality. To me, Accomplice is really an installation that serves as a magnifying glass or a magnifying lens into our built environment and how we co-inhabit the world with intelligent agents that we don't know much about generally in our daily life. Accomplice is almost literally staging this world, embedding a troop of curious, busy, intelligent agents into the architectural skin, an architectural skin that we are familiar with, and rendering it strange. So these troop of curious agents, they just go about their own business in a way, and Rob will tell you a bit more what their own business is. But as they go about their own business, they have an impact on our reality and our world. They're transforming our lived environment and have a visceral, physical impact on it. So that would be the short description.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah.
So and then like I said, everyone has a different experience with this work. For me, it was curiosity, but it might be different things for different people. In a way, also, I think maybe in an artistic approach, you could have almost like an outside-in perspective, like how can we build artworks that people tend to project, you know, a meaning on, like you said in the beginning, emotions, attentions, etc. And the other approach, of course, is are we using AI to actually drive the artwork? But maybe from that outside-in perspective, you already hinted at it, you know, like Rob, maybe you can say something, not so much, you know, like what kind of AI is inside, but more, what are the different things that people project on this work, and what were maybe the nudges that you used in this work to kind of to evoke those, to evoke that projection, if you wish.
It is that feedback loop with curiosity as well, I think.
I guess the strongest thing that people, if we watch the people watching the robots, the strongest thing is the sense in which they're somehow visiting the robot's environment, the almost a zoo-like feeling that they're coming and they're sharing this environment with them. They're sharing the wall is the boundary, but they're there on the sort of robot's terms. And for us, then the tension is between building the robots that are actually doing something. So let's say they're learning, or we're trying to model curiosity or whatever, and performing that curiosity so that it's recognizable from the outside, so that people who come to the artwork can actually see them going about their business and interpret their movements, and when they are actually engaging with the audience, when they're looking through the holes that they've made.
Yeah.
And I would perhaps also like to, there's also this soundscape that has become really important. So we've programmed them. At first, I think it was a kind of a, what is it called, just for testing purposes and so forth. So they use the chisel also as a signaling to each other. And so they're collaborating with each other as they're exploring the world, and they're changing it together. They're collaborating on sculpting the work, and that becomes, as the soundscape is often the first thing that audiences experience, and it's also the thing based on which they follow. So they follow the robots along the wall and then peek in from the outside. There's a bit of a they have to peek in, and often we had to tell them also that they must not reach through the wall with their phones, because that is often the first response, that people think they can get a better look at the robots with their phones, but of course the robots don't know about phones and hands and so forth. So.
That's funny. Yeah, and so they're having interactions with each other. They're having interactions with the humans, and it's not just random behavior, but this way you evoke these different emotional responses within the human. Okay, that's really interesting. I also heard, at some point you exhibited this in Bilbao. You built like a huge wall. There's also this time element to it. I think it started with a very nice white wall, and which was spotless clean, and 3 months later it was completely destroyed. So
yes,
that was cool. Hey, now. Obviously, I think people might be curious on what's happening behind these walls, but I would actually, and you made a previous work which is called Zwischenräume, where people can take a sneak peek. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over Zwischenräume, and I'm going to straight to another project of yours called Machine Movement Lab. To the audience, Petra's and Rob's websites are on our website for the event. So by all means, I would check in there and check out the Zwischenräume project if you're curious about what is behind this wall. Let's talk about Machine Movement Lab. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give a very short description, and then we're first going to watch a video. But basically, you wanted to send a robot to dance school. So to interpret, that's my interpretation, to interpret the modern dance that dancers would perform and turn it in its own choreography. So let's roll a little video so that the audience can experience that work.
The consciousness of my body and consciousness of the breath, because I think it's a back and forth. Yeah.
Okay, that was great. Interesting to see this movie. Like I said, we wanted to send a robot to dance school and then see what kind of language, what kind of personal interpretation of dance the robot could actually perform. Again, let's do maybe a little bit the same thing, if you don't mind. So I'll start with Petra. talk a little bit more about your motivation actually to do this work. I think it's probably both experiential, but also researchy in a way, right? So I think it's interesting to discuss that a bit. And then we'll switch again to Rob to see his thoughts as well. And Rob can maybe also comment a little bit to the AI inside. So not just projection of AI, but you also use some heavy duty AI inside here, some neural networks to let the robots learn. But Petra, maybe first from your perspective, what made you come to this work? What are you researching here?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as you already mentioned, this Machine Movement Lab project has started a bit differently to accomplish, because it's more straightforward an artistic research project rather than, so the goal is not in the first instance to develop an experience that renders specific questions tangible to the audience, but to really use perhaps embodied experiences as a research methodology. And in later years, we are planning to make performances with performers and the robot performers to involve audiences into these questions. But for the past 5 years, this project has very much focused on research and research methodology. And what Machine Movement Lab does is it takes the question of human, non-human encounters or human-machine relationships into the still young research fields of human-robot interaction and social robotics, and where these human-machine relationships are often explored with human-like or humanoid robots. You have the little now next to you, so that would be considered a humanoid robot, that has limbs and a head, and you often a human recorded voice, or at least uses human language to communicate. And we really were interested in approaching this question of human-machine relationships from a different starting point, and looking at how human-machine relationships can perhaps evolve on a more horizontal level. And by horizontal, I mean to really look at, so to not model human-machine relationships after human-human relationships, but to look at what is possible with abstract machinic entities. How can we develop relationships with them? How can we negotiate meaning with them? And we have early on identified movement, and particularly movement qualities. So the way how we use weight, the way how we use amplitude, and energy to express ourselves for meaning making between very, very different embodiments, or morphologies. And we have developed a methodology that we call performative body mapping, where we harness the expertise of contemporary dancers and choreographers to socially situate the robot, this very non-human-like machine, in ways that it can learn about human movement qualities that we can read. But it doesn't perform these human movement qualities as a human, but grounded it in its own machinic anatomy and perceptual world. So Rob can perhaps talk about this later.
So it's learning from the humans, but it's putting its own special sauce on top of it. So yes. that's interesting. But that makes me immediately curious. That's maybe a question for Rob, really.
Yeah.
Also, how do they learn? Because I have this sneaky suspicion there's a little bit of AI inside here, to let these robots learn from the humans.
Yeah. So we're particularly interested in this project in trying to combine learning from two different directions. So there's learning from the bottom up, the robot learning how to move based on its own embodiment, so that it's unique. It can move in unique ways, and we want it to take full advantage of its movement capabilities. Those were actually designed based on studies of the dancers moving as well. So the whole design of the robot was based around working with dancers, choreographers, to actually design the morphology of the robot. But then we want to start the robot again learning from that morphology what its movement capabilities are. And then from the other end, we have, as you could see in the video, performers working in costumes that mimic the robot. This helps us to implement or get over some of the problems with demonstration learning. So we're asking the dancers to demonstrate certain movements. We can then use supervised learning to learn to generalize those movements, but then we're using the grounded movement capabilities of the robot to interpret and improvise on top of those movements that have been provided by the dancer. So it can take it in ways that the dancers couldn't, based on its previously learned understanding, or it's a little bit strong, but previously learned control systems for its own embodiment. So it can do things that maybe the dancers couldn't do, but we can do it based upon the biases and constraints that have been learned through the recordings.
Okay, well, that's yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, the costume serves also, it serves for the dancer to get a better understanding of the machine embodiment. So we don't ask dancers to demonstrate human dancing, but we ask them to step into the robotic embodiment and to engage with the world from within this robotic embodiment. And this is how they develop their. So it's a bit of an intermeshing of human movement qualities and robotic embodiment. And this is where our movement recordings start, and that then gets further transformed into the machine learning, as Robert said.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think you're also using constraints. The best artists give themselves constraints. Let me just make a painting with just brown paint, for example. So you use the constraint here of the box to let the dancers imagine the world of the robots, and vice versa. Well, this is fascinating work. There's so much more I would love to ask you, but time is up. So I'm going to jump into both your websites. I'm going to look into all these wonderful art projects, and also Rob, on your website I did take a sneak peek, so I see a lot of interesting work around computational creativity as well. So I'm definitely going to jump in deeper, and we should repeat this event and talk for 5 hours maybe. So thank you very much.
Anytime.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
All right. So okay then. So that brings us to the next segment, and actually we're going to swap interviewers. So the next interviewer will be Assistant Professor Tessa Verhoef, who works in the area of AI and language evolution, and she is going to talk to Edward Fosch, and she will probably introduce him.
Hi everyone, so my name is Tessa Verhoef. I am just like Peter. I am an assistant professor at the computer science department here at Leiden University. And I have the pleasure to be chatting with Eduard Fosch Villaronga. So Eduard is an assistant professor also at Leiden University, and he is also has been appointed as an expert by the European Commission in a panel on artificial intelligence as well. So hi, Eduard. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Can you all hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me too?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's great to have you here. It's great. Your work is really relevant for the theme that we are talking about today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Tessa.
Yeah, so you're an assistant professor at the School of Law, but you also work with robotics and AI, right?
Yes, that's correct. Even if I will start assistant professor in January, so still a postdoc for a couple of more days. But yes, I work at the eLaw Center for Law and Digital Technologies at Leiden Law School, and my topic revolves around understanding the legal and ethical challenges that robots pose to society, with a special focus on healthcare. So in one side, My work is divided between telling roboticists to take into account other aspects than just safety into account, like data protection, autonomy, or dignity, but also trying to tell policymakers that sometimes they also need to catch up and make some efforts in framing these developments adequately.
Great. Yeah. So I assume that the topic that we will be talking about today also goes in that direction. So you joined us today to talk about sex care robots. So this sounds really novel and exciting. So can you tell us a little bit about what you have in mind?
Yeah, definitely. So robots sometimes challenge the juridical framework, putting into questions many aspects like privacy or transparency. But in other occasions, they might offer possibilities that once seemed far-fetched, and they can help users largely. So think about an exoskeleton that helps users walk again, right? This is a clear example on how there are people that cannot do certain activities as other people do, like walking or eating, for instance. And for some time, I kept thinking, how do these people experience sexual pleasures? Do they have the possibility to masturbate, for instance, or can they have relationships usually? Because I do not know, but these topics seem very taboo, and nobody is really talk about this, and it gives me the impression that there's so much people that they do not have the same opportunities to enjoy the pleasures that life give to all of us. So I do not know if I can share with you a video so that we can see this more clearly.
Yeah, let's watch the video.
Oui, les rêves érotiques, oui, j'en fais souvent. Bizarrement, enfin comme dans la plupart de mes rêves d'ailleurs, je suis pas handicapée. Donc je peux bouger et souvent je fais l'inverse de ce que je pourrais faire dans la vraie vie.
On va vers l'extérieur.
Laetitia Rebor is a 30-year-old translator and teacher with 7 full-time aides. Spinal muscular atrophy limits movement to her left thumb, left toe, and facial muscles. But she still has a strong sense of touch.
Je suis touchée par les mains des gens depuis toute petite, quoi. Moi, je pense que j'ai besoin d'un toucher qui soit vraiment là que pour le côté plaisir et pas pour le côté fonctionnel. Oui. Je suis encore vierge, je le dis sans problème.
She wants to experience sex.
Souvent, on m'a dit mais t'as pas d'autre chose à penser? Ouais, bon, bah ça fait plaisir.
So, Eduard, this. So, can you say something about the video?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you can see, right, although sexuality is a central aspect of human experience, awareness and knowledge about it do not come straightforward for disabled populations. On the contrary, it seems that it is largely constrained and pathologized and even ignored in many different settings. So many aspects constrain how people with a particular disability experience and engage themselves with sexual experiences. And some of the most worrisome barriers come from the very same institution. Some researchers highlight that people with intellectual disabilities are purposefully misinformed about sexual health to reinforce fears as means of inhibiting sexual activity. Or other healthcare providers, for instance, consider that people with intellectual disabilities or other disabilities should not have a sexual life, reproduce, or look after children, and there should not need for sexual and reproductive health services. And if you think about it, if a person is physically disabled, their own physical disability may prevent that person from satisfying her sexual needs. Think, for instance, of a person that it is deprived of her upper limbs or is paralyzed. And on the other side, people experiencing mental illness, for instance, may experience sexuality and intimate relationships very differently for many reasons. Sometimes actually the medication that these people take also decrease their sexual desires, leading also sometimes to sexual dysfunction. So I got interested into the topic because it seems that the United Nations in 1993 already stated that persons with disabilities should enjoy family life and personal integrity and should not be denied the opportunity to experience their sexuality or have sexual relationships or even experience parenthood. However, after nearly 30 years of discussion, this access to the sexual rights of disabled populations remains largely an unfinished agenda, as if society failed somehow to recognize people with disabilities as sexual beings, right?
So, are there really no other resources available at the moment for to help these persons with disabilities?
Yeah, so it is true. So there are some initiatives out there. So some countries have reflected on how they could materialize this sort of abstract idea on how to enforce the sexual rights of people with disabilities. In the Netherlands or in other countries, they refer this as what they called sex care. It is not really well defined, but it would be more like a sort of sexual service that it is for people with severe physical or mental disabilities, that it is often done by professionals with a background in healthcare, and that it is usually focused on intimacy, physical touch, and sexual satisfaction. And in Europe, there is even a European platform called European Platform for Sexual Assistance for Persons with Disabilities that brings together different organizations that are focusing on these aspects. The problem with this, though, it is that it's not very clear how this is managed. It's not very clear which is the type of knowledge that we should have in order to provide these services, whether this should be some healthcare professionals, whether this could be done by sex workers. If we think about sex work, this is also highly contested. It's not legal in many jurisdictions. There's a lot of problems concerning sex workers, or even, for instance, the question itself on whether we could use public funds to actually support these initiatives, right? Because right now it's not really part of the care. So in a way, yes, as the audience can see in the slide, we believe that everyone should enjoy the same pleasures of life. It's not very clear how to get to that point.
But then you thought about sex robots.
Yeah, so then with another colleague of mine, Adam Paulsen in Australia, we had this discussion and we kept thinking about this topic, and he's a computer scientist and I work with robotics. So I thought, well, maybe we could think about the use of sex robots for this purpose. So sex robots are service robotics that perform actions contributing directly towards improvement in the satisfaction of the sexual needs of users. And as we can see in these different pictures that you can see in the platform, sex robots have different embodiments, including fully or partially bodied humanoids, body parts such as arms, heads, or genitals used for sex-related tasks, or non-biomimetic robotic devices used for sexual pleasure. So these robots usually display realistic sex-related body movements and also have sensors to react in real time to user interaction, and include some human cues such as voice, gaze, or lip sync, so that it can support more human-like interactions. And as you can see, they're both male or female. They also have different characteristics and capabilities that we thought that might prove useful in fulfilling some of the sexual desires of disability people. And we thought with Adam that it is not only about satisfying their sexual needs, which of course it is, no, because the literature actually suggests that there is no loss of libido in disabled adult population, and actually people with also intellectual disabilities have sexual needs and engage in sex and long-term relationships also. But also we thought that it could be very useful for other two themes. We thought about the emotional theme, but also the educational. And we thought about emotional because while sex robots have a clear functional goal to satisfy users' sexual needs, these manufacturers profoundly stress their technological emotional support side. And these emotional features give the idea that the more and more we could be thinking about supporting positive and close encounters with persons beyond purely sexual experiences. So I think that could be something that could be explored, but also in the education. And this is because some authors conducting different studies reveal that participants with intellectual disabilities scored low concerning their understanding of consent and abuse, suggesting a profound need to have more and better sex education for persons with intellectual disabilities to exercise their sexual rights while protecting also themselves. And we thought that sex robots could help disabled people with cognitive challenges to learn about sexuality and emotions, including consent. And this is very important because abusive behavior in this population is actually unsettlingly uncommon.
Yeah, so you've clearly thought about really many aspects of this problem, and I still think to many people this might sound still pretty wild. So are there any obvious drawbacks?
Yeah, you're totally right. So this doesn't come without drawbacks, right? And actually, my work largely focuses on trying to understand what are the legal and regulatory issues and also the ethical challenges of certain technology. So I am very much aware of all the risks that this happen. Actually, there are some researchers led by Kathleen Richardson, I think. She was pushing for the campaign against sex robots. So basically, she really thought that we were at the beginning of a revolution that we do not really want to start, in the sense that there's a lot of issues concerning this topic, and some of them relate to the idea of objectifying women. So for many years, we've been seeing how the role of women have been portrayed in a way that actually is not reflecting the role that women should have in society, and that the objectification of the female body would actually imply many different really bad consequences. And together with this, there are many other concerns, right? So we might even think like, okay, so how can we ensure that the human robot interaction is safe? how we can think about whether there are privacy or data protection issues, right? Because like maybe there are some of these devices that process a lot of data, and if someone could have access to it, then who would be responsible if something goes wrong? But also, throughout my work, I also try to reflect upon what are the long-term consequences of the use of this technology, and some of them is thinking whether a sporadic or a quick fix that we could do now in order to help realize the sexual rights for disabled peoples. At the same time, it seems that it would be also probable that then we would be exacerbating the same issue that we try to solve with this technology, which is basically that we will keep reinforcing loneliness, or the fact that this part of the population deserves only to be in touch with technology and not with other humans, right?
Yes, yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's time for us to move on to the next item already. So it was really great to chat with you. I had many more questions also for you, but I know that for the two of us will be collaborating in the future in any case, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I also wish you the best of luck with your research. And thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for this.
So the next segment here is an interview with Jasper Schelling and Suzanne Verberne on the topic of online polarization and in online polarization in online media. And basically, what we saw earlier is maybe not so middle of the road kind of works around or applications of AI. We wanted to do that to open up everyone's thinking a little bit, and also to start this discussion around inclusivity and the ethical aspects. But we also wanted to have a topic where we would say, well, hey, this is an area where everyone is experiencing AI really on a daily basis, in both good ways and bad ways. So we're going for this whole topic of online media and both the evil and the good roles that AI can play. Obviously, AI is being used in the hunt for clicks, and people are talking about echo chambers and filter bubbles. Maybe we're experiencing that ourselves on YouTube or on Spotify. But the question is also, can we maybe potentially reverse that role of AI? So to discuss that, I have Suzanne Verberne here, Associate Professor. Hi, Suzanne. And we have Jasper Schelling, and Jasper is an educator at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences and also a member of the ACE Foundation. So Jasper, I'm going to start with you. Maybe you can just share a little bit about what ACE is. What is your purpose and mission in life as ACE? And then we'll jump into the topic.
Okay, so ACE is a platform for design, journalism, and in this case, information technology. And basically, what we do is that we create a multidisciplinary space in which we can experiment both with journalists as well as scientists, as well as designers and artists on news in the digital domain. So that's what we do with ACE. And in this case, there's a specific program that I think we'll be talking about today, which is Reverb Channel, which is where we explore the impact of AI and machine learning technologies on digital news.
Yeah, and you guys put like a great movie together, that actually explains the idea of reverb channel in a nutshell. So I suggest that we go and have a look at that video. So let's roll the reverb channel video now.
Great.
Online media consumption is controlled by algorithms and feedback loops that are an indispensable element for news organizations in their hunt for clicks. These commercially driven metrics are given priority over editorial considerations, and as a result, news channels steadily turn into large echo chambers while their orientation is becoming increasingly unclear. Articles about hotly debated issues such as racism, politics, wealth, and poverty lead to polarized discussions in social media. These result in massive amounts of clicks to the benefit of news organizations. But where does the news value come in? Are these clicks-invoking publications intended to inform, to analyze, or opinionate? Or mainly to maximize audience engagement and manipulate social media behavior? In order to explore how polarization, echo chambers, filter bubbles, and the like work in contemporary media culture, we started Reverb Channel, a platform that reverses the role of artificial intelligence. Instead of using AI to optimize clicks and attention, Reverb Channel uses it to uncover framing and bias. Reverb Channel offers data scientists, artists, and media professionals a platform to carry out investigative experiments and share results to evoke debate with the field and the general public. It is based on a continually updated, large corpus of news publications from a wide range of sources covering the last 20 years and provides data, tools, and expertise. By unlocking so-called ideology spaces, Reverb Channel aims to provide more diverse ways to search, discover, and experience the news.
Interesting. So I like it how it first starts with the potential evil role of AI, and then it tries to explore maybe certain ways how we can reverse the role of AI to uncover these ideology spaces. But nothing bad about a little bit of dystopia. So let's maybe start with some of these potential bad effects of AI in online media. The hunt for clicks, echo chambers. I know there's a lot of debate on whether these exist, yes or no, but I think to some degree everyone experiences it as well, for listening to Spotify or watching YouTube videos. So let's explore the dark side for a brief moment here before we switch to the bright side. What is your view on that?
Well, I think when it comes to the dark side, I think the thing is that the most interesting is what we think of as technology, or how we feel or think that these technologies work. So if you take, for example, the filter bubble as an example, a lot of professionals highly contest the existence of it, and I think I think the arguments that they make are very convincing. At the same time, it is a convenient explanation to a large audience, and one of the things that we like to do with the project is also to highlight this tension between, on the one hand, the convenient technologically driven explanation of how this technology works, which is partly also there's some mystification going on there. Yet on the other hand, also showing the limits of actually applying these technologies and showing how the applications of these technologies are not necessarily difficult, but accessible actually to a large group of people. And also here we might also help the general audience also by engaging with it and showing actually what's going on under the hood with these technologies, a way in which they can more easily think of what is actually possible and what sort of separates the sense from nonsense.
Yeah, so let's maybe make that a little bit more tangible. And of course, we all experience sometimes a bit that we get pulled into our filter bubble on Twitter or or the same old coffee lounge music on your Spotify, or so what is your, can you give some specific examples of what you research? I think you guys you collected a corpus of around 4 million Dutch news articles, and then you invite people, researchers and artists and designers, to kind of look at ways to reverse the role for AI. Can you give me some practical, specific examples of how we could use AI actually to whatever, uncover biases, build ideology spaces, or whatever we want to do to counter polarization online media? Can you give me some concrete examples?
Sure. Well, we currently have one researcher working on distinguishing news articles from opinion. So, as part of our data collection, we collected the output of all these various Dutch news websites, and these consist of a combination of different types of articles, different types of news, but also opinion. And we found it interesting to see whether we could actually train an algorithm to distinguish between these two types of articles. And we actually found that this was it was possible to do quite well, to also distinguish quite clearly. And that's one of those examples where we can actually show how these things work, and also what these kinds of models pick up on as distinguishing between news articles and more opinionated and opinion-based.
And then what would you say? What would be ways how we could then could use such a model? Can you bring that to life? What would be particular use cases of if an AI could tell us whether something is opinion news, why that is important? You probably have some ideas about that, and maybe you can give us a little bit of a look into the kitchen or into the mind of the document versus news robot here, and what kind of features does it actually use?
Well, if you look at the application side, it might be looking at models and forms of AI that help you to be a bit more critical consumer, or a more critical news consumer. On the other hand, if we go back to the question of, well, what does the model actually pick up? And that, I think this is also the part where the mystification sort of, or at least the aura that it has, can lead to trying to think of the word. It's not disillusionment, but it's the interesting thing is that the results from the model gives you a reality check. So, for example, in this case, with the opinion versus news article, we actually found that the models in this case actually picked up words that are referring to sources that really distinguish news articles from opinion. So, according to because of a representative person said A or B, these types of words are actually what the models pick up as distinguishing between news and opinion, and that makes complete sense from a journalistic perspective.
Yeah.
So,
clear.
But again, this is where where the technology becomes a reality check.
So it's not magic.
No, it's not magic at all, and I think that's also one of the interesting things to explore, and also to educate people about.
Yeah, because if you then circle back up again, and so you started your slot with talking where the triangle between AI research, journalism, and designers, right? So I guess you also target the audience could be also the journalists, the designers, or maybe even the general public to show these type of things and to stir debate. So what is the role? How do you see the perfect role for ACE in this within this context? How do you guys complement the lovely work that universities are doing, for example, and also is there a particular way how maybe you want to do a shout out to people that would like to work with you guys?
Well, I think the focus for us is on providing this sort of interdisciplinary space to experiment in, and also to experiment with a space in which creatives and scientists and journalists and information and other professionals can meet and exchange. And
are they open to
that? We are very much open to that. So there's actually
but the journalists and the AI people and the designers, there's a little bit of language barrier then.
Yeah, and I think that's also the on the one hand, that is the interesting thing, that we have to sort of cross in between these different language barriers that are there, and at the same time, it's also about facilitating an environment in which play and discovery can work really well to find these new things.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Jasper. Let's maybe move to Suzanne. So Suzanne is not only associate professor here at Leiden University in the text mining, she's heading up the text mining group. She's also the woman with one of the coolest Twitter names I've ever seen, namely Suzanne. You know, so you were there early to claim that particular name. It's with a Z, but still, you know, I'm impressed, Suzanne.
Yeah, I was early.
Yeah, great. So if you so you can already kind of check her out on Twitter and follow her, because she posts a lot of interesting stuff around text mining. But let's enough chatter. Let's move on to the topic. Listening to Jasper, it sounds very interesting, but my head starts to ache a little bit in terms of how many angles you actually have to this. You should have to this topic, right? So where do you start? So what is your take on that? You know, what are relevant disciplines? Because you work in interdisciplinary conglomerates as well. What are some of the different disciplines that are relevant in this area?
Yeah, so that's a very important point that you made. So Jasper was mentioning distinguishing between opinionated articles and news articles, right? So that is one angle. And that is also, so that's one thing that you can consider, is like subjectivity of news. But there are many other things, and most importantly, what is currently very actual is the rise of misinformation, right? So there are many efforts in across disciplines, actually, that is correct, to be able to distinguish true and false information on social media, and that's an incredibly difficult topic. And actually, when I was just following the first part of this talk show, everything was very positive and exciting about AI. And I was thinking, wow, my part is so depressing, because distinguishing true news and false news online is an incredibly difficult task.
Yeah.
And so you are asking about aspects that you can look at. And one of the things that we can look at, apart from the subjectivity that Jasper mentioned, is quality of content. So there, for example, we looked at the spread of news, mainstream news on social media, particularly Facebook, compared to the spread of junk news on social media. And before, when Jasper
what is junk news? Maybe you should introduce
junk
it
news
to the
is
audience.
clickbait. I actually had an example. It was shown when Jasper was being interviewed. So on the left side, there was a news article about people who were lost on open sea. And on the right side, there was a news article about which, like, it seems similar, right? But it has this very different tone. A woman wants to put her dog down, which is very sad. There's lots of emotions there. And then they say, the reason is so ridiculous, right? So you know this kind of stuff on social media. For a long time, it was very prominent. And actually what we found was that on the Dutch Facebook, there were more user engagements with junk news, with clickbait, than there was with regular news. And so I actually have a graph on that. And we looked at that over time. We had data from 5 years. And we saw that over that 5-year time, on average, more people liked and commented and shared junk news, clickbait, than they did mainstream news. and then we used all Dutch regular news media, right? So this is the box plot of how. So you see the junk news box is a little bit higher than the mainstream news, and on the next slide there is even a trend over time visible, where the difference even gets larger over time. So this was very worrisome, right? But also, luckily, social media companies, they have started to oppose this, right? They want to oppose this trend because, of course, they know that. And so this data ended in 2017, and I don't know what the status is now, but I have the feeling that clickbait has been seen a lot less on social media in the past year. So that's a good thing. But still, detecting misinformation is very difficult.
All right. Oh, we have an incoming Skype call. Maybe we should close it down, and we'll just tell the next speaker that we will ping him when his time is up. Yeah. So, all right. So, so it's nice because you kind of make it rather than this huge world hunger problem. You're trying to peel the onion here a little bit, and let's take one of the sub problems. Let's first estimate it. Let's see how big it is. In this case, junk news, and how do people respond to it? So, but you also worked in other areas, right? So, like politics, for example. But one of the areas, of course, which is very current at the moment is we're in the COVID situation. So we're just coming out of a very polarized discussion in U.S. politics, and now we had the whole COVID situation where there's a lot of news that's being shared. We have the vaccines coming up, where we need to see can we encourage people to actually get vaccinated. And that of course it's also causing all kinds of Twitter storms. And are you looking into that as well? How can we use these techniques in that particular context?
Definitely. So that is very worrying, right? In the Netherlands, the COVID pandemic has led to more distrust in government, in media, and in science. And I mean, that's very worrying. And this, unfortunately, has been nurtured also by conspiracy theories. So this has been, in October, this has been published by the National Coordinator on Security and Counterterrorism in the Netherlands. And so one of the things that we try to do, apart from detecting that something is misinformation, is also we use manual labeling to say that something is misinformation, and then look at the spread of misinformation and who are the people who are spreading this. And one thing that is interesting is that social media is network data. So you can, for example, in Twitter, you can create a network of people who are communicating with each other. And in collaboration with the Dutch National Health Institute, the RIVM, we looked at discourse surrounding COVID regulations in the Netherlands. And actually their question was very difficult. They wanted to measure the support for the regulations, for example, mouth masks or lockdown regulations on social media. And that was an incredibly difficult problem. So you can imagine that, for example, so people who are doing applied text mining, they sometimes think that sentiment analysis is a very good solution to these kind of questions, right? So you can measure to some extent the sentiment of a message on social media. Is it positive or negative? But then people can be very much in favor of one regulation, like say very much in favor of the use of mouth masks, but expressing a very negative sentiment, for example, about the lack of mouth masks, right? The government has not supplied sufficient mouth masks for healthcare employees, for example. So that can be very negative and critical and still in favor of.
Yeah. Okay, so that means ultimately that
of regulations, and this is is oppressing the regulations, right?
All right.
So that was challenging.
Yeah. Okay, so that's so we can see that AI can certainly play a role there too. If we don't try to solve world hunger here, and but really peel the onion and try to solve different sub-problems, like you said, recognition of junk news, how does it spread, which are real people, which are fake, those type of things. So breaking down the problem into smaller pieces where AI can help, and then maybe also demystifying AI here a little bit. It's not some, we heard it earlier today in the talk show, it's not some magic potion.
It's not magic, yeah. So that is something that I always tell collaborators, is text mining is not magic. And we really need collaboration between humans and AI, machine learning. And those humans should be experts. So that's what you asked in the beginning about interdisciplinary collaborations. We always work in collaboration with social scientists, with people from the humanities. The people in Leiden University, Peter Berger and Alexander Pleiter, were collaborators on this junk news paper. They initiated this idea. So we can strengthen each other in collaborating this. Also, maybe one last thing to say, because I know I want to go to the next point, is that even though we cannot fully distinguish false news from true news, and that's very difficult, we can work to diversify what we see on the web, right? So in news recommendation, there's one project, and it's a shout out to Meerte Rover, she is here. She has started her PhD project on this topic on diversifying news recommendations. Can we just offer more diverse information to people without classifying it in true and false, right? Because you can diverse on aspects of certain topics and lighten the different sides of each topic. So that was the final thing that I wanted to say, that we even can work on solutions even though we cannot completely recognize the problem.
Okay, that's interesting. So AI has, of course, its evil role in all of this, but we, similar to what Jasper said, we can also look at how can we reverse the role, use AI to study how big is the problem anyway, and then maybe use it to solve different parts of that solution. Like maybe also as a quick shout out, because we need to wrap it up, but Jasper, I think you worked also with a student on that particular topic for the document classification. Maybe you can tell us who he was.
So sure. Sure. So the research that I spoke specifically about was done by David Bouter, and that's one of the sub projects that we're working on.
Excellent.
That was done by David.
Well, that makes the circle round, because I know that Suzanne is also one of David's supervisors. Thank you very much for this very engaging session. Again, this is a topic we could talk probably for 4 hours about. But I'd like to thank you for coming in the talk show and sharing your ideas. Thank you very much. And again, if you want to know more, you're welcome. And if you want to know more about ACE, if you want to know more about the stuff that Suzanne is working on, just check the event page, where you'll find links to their web pages, to the webpage of ACE, the webpage of Suzanne. Thank you very much. And now we're actually going to the final slot here of the session. And it's a very special guest we'd like to welcome here. And that's Professor Jay McClelland from Stanford University.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jay McClelland, good morning to you. Jay McClelland is a cognitive psychologist and professor at Stanford University, where he's one of the founders and a current co-director of the Center for Mind, Brain, and Computation. And together with David Rommelhart, he arguably started the last AI summer in the 1980s with the 2-volume book Parallel Distributed Processing, for which they received several awards, among which the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association and the EEE Neural Networks Pioneer Award. Good afternoon, Jay, or good morning for you. Thank you so much for joining this event. The idea of connectionism was a game changer for the field of cognitive science. For our viewers who are not in the field of cognitive science, could you maybe explain very briefly what the idea of connectionism entails?
Well, the predominant idea in cognitive science when I was starting out in the field was that our knowledge was something we would think about as a set of propositional statements. Okay, all ducks have webbed feet, for example, would be something that we would think of as the nature of our knowledge about a semantic fact. Zebras have stripes. But if you wanted to actually recognize a picture of a zebra, that actually didn't help you, because your eyeball couldn't read the dictionary that had the propositions in it. So, well, what would be the actual system that the brain could use to sort of translate an image of a zebra into that's a zebra, right? So we thought, well, maybe a neural network could do that, because there could be connections from little features that represent stripes, let's say, that kind of connect up to a population of neurons that represents the concept of a zebra. And so where's the knowledge in that? Well, it's in the connections between all those neurons. And so that's basically what the idea of connectionism is.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So together with David Rumelhart, you put connectionism in the spotlight in the 80s with the 2 PDP volumes. But you've been working with spreading activation networks at least since 1977, as far as I could find in your CV when you were at UCSD. In the introduction to the new PDP handbook, you write that your understanding of PDP models came about largely through hands-on experimentation. But how did you come up with the ideas behind PDP? Did it just emerge from collaborations and discussions?
So when I was an undergraduate, I took a class in sensory mechanisms from a physiological psychologist, I guess, or a physiological vision scientist. And, the field of vision has always been one of the places where the boundary between neuroscience and psychology has been less totally clear. In cognition, it's harder to know how you can use information from the brain directly. But in thinking about how neurons respond to visual information, you could do that experiment by shining light into the eye of an anesthetized cat, right? Or something like that. And so as an undergraduate, I was exposed to the basic idea that I was describing to you before, that a neuron could respond to stimulation by virtue of connections among from incoming neurons. And I, in the early 70s, I was a PhD student taking, first exposed to cognitive psychology as a PhD student. Before that, I'd been exposed to animal learning, sensory physiology, and psychophysics. And I just sort of was always thinking, well, hey, we're thinking about this stuff so abstractly, but it's got to be implemented in the brain. So in 1975, I was invited to a conference, and I heard a talk by a man named James Anderson, who introduced me to simple neural network models that he was already using to think about aspects of perception and learning. And I was like, oh, we have a population of units that have connections to other units. I could represent this as a vector and a matrix. So the vector is the activations of the units, and the matrix is the array of connections. And now I can present a vector as an input and propagate activation through these connections. And that's when I started studying these things, as you say, by running simulations.
Right. How much of that work would you say your initial work was inspired by Minsky and Pappert's work at MIT?
I wasn't affected by Minsky and Papert at all in my case. In fact, Minsky and Papert were telling people that you shouldn't be connectionists, right? That their book essentially said, look, this connectionist idea that Rosenblatt is pursuing, Rosenblatt was pursuing in the 50s and early 60s, it isn't going to fly. That was the message that they communicated, and it created, what was I guess I would call a neural network winter from 63 when their book came out until, well, Grossberg was continuing on in that period, and Jim Anderson was continuing on in that period. So I think of those two guys as the only neural network researchers who were moving forward during this Minsky and Papert winter. And I myself was, when we started building models of perception, the interactive activation model, which was my first publication with Rumelhart, Grossberg was a very important influence on building our neural network. So Grossberg and Anderson were my inspirations, as well as the brain itself.
Okay, right. Well, so your PDP work originally meant to provide like a formal theory behind the neural implementation of cognitive phenomena, but artificial neural networks have been extremely successful in AI. Looking at the history of artificial neural network research, it seems to illustrate a very successful cooperation between cognitive scientists and computer scientists. So like Rosenblatt that you talked about earlier, he was a psychologist and he developed the perceptron in 58, and then Minsky and Papert even mention him in their dedication of the perceptron book. And then in 86, David Rumelhart, your collaborator, a cognitive psychologist as well, introduced backpropagation, one of the most widely used training algorithms for neural networks. Did you or any of your artificial neural network contemporaries in psychology ever expect their huge success in AI?
Well, it wasn't my thought. I wasn't trying to do artificial intelligence. I was always interested in how the human brain worked. But, the PDP group, so Rumelhart, he was a mathematical psychologist. So his background was in mathematics as an undergraduate, and he went to Stanford in mathematical psychology, which was then, one of the areas in the department. It was, and got his PhD in mathematical psychology. And then when he got to UCSD, he and Don Norman were very inspired by what we now call good old-fashioned AI, all that propositional-based kind of thinking. And he got very involved in that. And so his book, he wrote a book called Human Information Processing in the early 70s, in which he laid out the use of early AI models to try to do language processing, for example. But it was around the time he was writing that book that he started to realize that they weren't working for him. And, I think he was one of the people who kind of understood that the contemporary AI research wasn't really succeeding to deal with natural human-like intelligence, like the ability to understand speech, for example.
Yeah.
Machine speech perception at that time was complete mess. But he was very inspired by what people were trying to do in that field. And so I think he always thought maybe that these things would be relevant. And then Jeff Hinton was trained in artificial intelligence. And he was a postdoc with us due to Dave. He was essentially, officially mentored by Dave Rumelhart, but he was actually teaching us how to think about the computational approaches to optimization, for example, and so on, which have become very central to the AI approaches. So I would say that people other than me were thinking already at that time that maybe there would be applications, and I think they were a little disappointed that it was so hard to get, actual working AI models based on the work coming out of the 80s.
Yeah, right. So this PDP work of yours, of course, it's based on the human brain. Do you think that the human brain can give ongoing inspiration for the development of new AI techniques, or is the idea of parallel distributed processing as far as the analogy goes?
Well, I would say yes, and the question is, so what exactly should we look for?
Right.
I think the main thing we should never do is to tell ourselves, well, we don't think the brain is doing that, so we're not going to build that into our artificial neural network. I myself find that, one of the key breakthroughs I think that Romelhart made in developing backprop was to not worry about whether or not he could figure out exactly how brains could be actually doing it right. So in other words, you didn't have to be able to say, well, look, here's the brain chemical that's doing the back propagation or something like that before you proceeded with that. So I think, he always liked to talk about neural networks as brain inspired rather than brain constrained, or I like to think of them as brain informed. I think about what I know about the brain, and I use that to inform my thinking, but not to constrain it. So brain inspired or brain informed. But ongoing motivation. Humans are still far better than any existing neural networks at all kinds of aspects of intelligence. And the question that we're asking in my group is, well, do we want to chalk that up to differences in architecture between the brain and artificial neural networks, or differences in the learning algorithm? Or are we just not in a position yet where our artificial neural networks can have the kind of rich, lifelong engagement with an actual sensory experience that, provides the initial fabric that supports the development of our perceptual and linguistic abilities and our motor skills, and then sort of provides the foundation for later acculturation and learning. I don't know the answers to these questions. The one thing I know is that I can't predict the future. So
definitely,
I think we should look for inspiration and information wherever we can, but not overly restrict our efforts in that way.
Right. Thanks. Well, your current work focuses on mathematical cognition, specifically from a PDP perspective. I find it extremely interesting, as it seems to integrate some sub-symbolic computations and symbolic representations. And one could argue that this is one of the big problems in cognitive neuroscience. Do you believe that mathematical cognition could be a foundation for more general intelligence? Or are you just interested in mathematics because you just like doing mathematics?
So I think of mathematical cognition as a very exciting sort of challenge for artificial general intelligence. I don't think that mathematical cognition per se is the foundation of all other forms of cognition, but I think that the achievements of Euclid and Einstein and Newton and so on, are the reflection of the actual capacities of brain-style computational systems that we've been studying, and to figure out how those systems could achieve, a new scientific formulation of ideas grounded in a set of formal statements, mathematical statements. It just seems to me like, if we could do that, nobody would argue that we hadn't solved the problem of intelligence, right? In fact, I was partly motivated to do this because people kept saying, oh yeah, these neural networks, they're fine for, perception. Like we said before, the visual system must be using a neural network. Surely everybody is going to have to accept that. But when it comes to, proving a theorem or deriving a new hypothesis or sort of conjecture in mathematics, the idea that neural networks might play a role in that was something that I think people could distance themselves from and say, oh no, that's this Cartesian thing, right? The body is a neural network system. Descartes was happy for that, right? He thought of it as little pipes rather than neurons sending electrical signals that didn't have electricity yet, but it was the same basic idea. We share that with animals, but the real thinking, that was something else, right? So I wanted my inspiration for thinking about mathematical cognition was to do the same kind of real thinking that Descartes did when he did math himself. And I think it's really exciting to be able to think about these kinds of questions. My main inspiration for this is a quotation that I found on a bench when I was taking a hike in a beautiful forest this summer. And it was a quote from Poincaré, which said, "It is by logic that we prove, but by intuition that we discover." And my way of thinking about this is that, we never would have had the breakthroughs of formal mathematics without logic. But we never would have had the question, well, or the idea that some sort of thing could be true without the intuition that the neural networks are going to provide for us here. And so I think of the formal systems, and this is where I'm flipping other people's ideas on their head. I think of the formal systems as being the creation of people striving to achieve clarity, and not the foundational characteristic of the human mind. I think of those formal systems as being things that people use to complement their intuition, and then they acquire expertise in using them. That's what we do when we go to university. Or maybe students who are going to go to university start taking courses in high school where they begin to develop an appreciation for these formal systems. Right. It's actually some Dutch educators whose names I won't dare to try to pronounce, who introduced the idea that it's only in the later stages of high school education, at the beginning stages of getting ready for university, that students even come to appreciate what mathematical or logical thinking is. And it's not the natural mode of thought of. So that's what I'm interested in. How do we come to be able to think that way, and how do we then harness that together with intuition? So we're not just sort of sitting there, cranking out logic.
Right. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jay, for clarifying your current work as well. Thank you very much for joining. all the best and happy holidays.
Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, so here we have Peter van der Putten for today's closing.
I'm just going to politely walk into our virtual stage here. Yeah, I'm still live, Leslie. All right, so well, thanks for hanging out here on this live stream talk show. I started the session by talking about some of the values we have as SAILS, where we say, we think that AI is kind of in between its infancy and puberty, right? So it really needs to be studied from a multidisciplinary point of view. Also, how important it is to keep a free and open mind, have the academic freedom to ask any type of questions, be open to the possibility, certainly also be open to the evil side effects of AI and how to mitigate those. And finally, we feel that there needs to be, that matches with this idea of AI being in between infancy and puberty, and the good and the evil sides, is that we need to also reach out from the university to the overall public and to really stir debate on these topics, because we need to design our future with the bots, right? So, and we firmly believe that the future of AI should be human, should we reap the benefits of it. So that was my closing statement. I just want to thank a couple of people here. I'd like to thank Leslie van Hoek, who is our producer here. So a little shout out to Leslie. I'd like to thank Misha Houtvast in the organizing committee, who put a lot of work into organizing, promoting the event. I'd like to thank Oscar Plaat, Joost Batenburg from Sales Management for supporting this. Abdel at LIAX, you know who you are. You helped us a lot with some of the logistics here, as well as Assistant Professor Joost Broekens of the Asocial Creature Lab. He was so kind to lend out his COVID-proof workspace to us. And with that, of course, I'd like to thank our speakers today and my fellow interviewers. So if you're interested in working with SAILS, whether you are a knowledge institution, a university, general public, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. If you're interested in future events of SAILS, check out our website. Follow us on Twitter at SAILS_Leiden. And with that, I would like to close the session. And first and foremost, thank all of you, the audience, for hanging out with us here and having such a great time. Thank you very much.